Hello, LTST. How are you? How's the energy level? Oh, it's the last session before the lunch break. Give me some energy. How is the energy level? That's a bit better. We're getting there. Awesome. So, for this panel, we're talking about shaping the ecosystem and how can we double down on impactful fundraising strategies. And for that, we have several speakers who have different roles in that ecosystem. I promise you it's going to be a super inspiring discussion with very interesting people. So, please welcome on stage Helena Torres, investor at Hans Women Group. Lisa Smith, co-founder at Prewave. Sangamitra Kara, EMEA Head of Inclusive Venture Group at Morgan Stanley. And Björn Lose, partner at Cavalry Ventures. All right, so to start it off, we're talking about ecosystem. So tell us in 90 seconds, each one of you, about your role in these ecosystems. Maybe let's start with you, Helena.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here. So I'm Helena Torres. I'm from Barcelona, Spain, and I'm investment manager at Hans Women Group, investing in South Europe in female-led startups. And I've been formerly entrepreneur myself, so I really try to bring to startups what has been my experience as an entrepreneur.
Very nice.
Hi, yes, I'm a startup founder based here in Vienna, B2B SaaS startup, Prewave. We are a supply chain intelligence solution, currently 135 people, about 10 minutes from here is our office. Yes, we have raised several rounds from VC investors, so that's what I can contribute to this panel. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Sangamitra Kara. I run the Inclusive Ventures Group at Morgan Stanley. It's our in-house accelerator program for women and ethnic minority founders. We are a relatively new player in the ecosystem in Europe, Middle East, and Africa. We've been running this program in the US for almost 6 years, and our head of the department is also here listening to us today.
Yeah, my name is Björn. I'm with Cavalry Ventures. Cavalry Ventures is a Berlin-based pre-seed and seed stage fund. We invest all over Europe, as I said, specifically focused on that stage. We are vertically agnostic and invest anywhere between $500,000 up to $4 million initially, and will then follow on throughout the rounds while handing over the lead to the larger fund generations at a Series A.
Very nice. Since we're talking about ecosystems, let's talk about, let's reflect on this word for a moment, because I think we discussed already on Tuesday that actually there's very little industries who use the word ecosystem beyond the startup industry. So ecosystem, naturally it comes from the biological word. So why do you think startups actually need an ecosystem? Why is this term so startup-ish? Maybe Sangamitra, since we discussed it already on Tuesday.
This is quite an interesting one. So I spent my whole career at Morgan Stanley, and just to give you a sense, we are over an 87,000 people organization globally. It's a globally systemically important bank, and the word ecosystem wasn't in my dictionary till I actually started looking at this space, and I really reflected about this. And what I find interesting is this idea that if you're a large organization, the sort of the ecosystems get formed within themselves, and they, you grow together, you have an agenda, and you sort of support each other as you're sort of thinking about it. And I think that that same idea is there when you're thinking about the startups, but because you're sort of doing with lots of smaller players, they all come together, they all figure out whether it's the investors bringing the money in, or the entrepreneurs who are building things, or policymakers who are sort of setting up the framework, or media and other agencies who are sort of really thinking about how do we spread the word, they all come together. At least that's my description of the word ecosystem and why it gets used so much more at this level as opposed to, if you're sitting within an organization. But it was quite funny. I was like, why would you use this word in the first place? But it was interesting realization.
I would like to add, when we talk about startups, we think on innovation. They are really shaping tomorrow. No? And if we talk about innovation, we cannot think that innovation can happen just being alone. There is a Dutch guy that changed the word innovation to say, innovation. So when you are alone, what you do is you invent. But when you really want to do innovation, it's win-novation. We do it together. And that's really what an ecosystem is. It's putting people together to think on the tomorrow. And the startups alone will be not successful if they don't have investors, if they don't have corporates, if they don't have customers, R&D centers, universities. So we need all the society to create the world of tomorrow.
Yeah, so for me as a founder, ecosystem, the word or the importance changed a bit over the time. I think as an early stage founder, particularly, so I started Prewave out of my PhD research at the Technical University in Vienna. And that was 2015 when I really started to think about making a startup out of the academic research. And the ecosystem looked really different in Vienna. But at the Technical University in Vienna, we had already something like a startup incubator. And this was an important ecosystem for me. So what they would do is really providing mentoring, coaching, access to investors to pitch our ideas when it was in a super, super early stage. It was actually academic research. We transformed into a pitch deck over a couple of days in order to validate whether there is a market for that. So that was in the beginning really helping us to get the entry points to the bigger ecosystem in Austria. That is very much the Public Grants Association, early stage business angels, VC investors, and getting all this coaching and mentoring to know how can you get funding ready. Now, in a bit later stage, I think ecosystem for us means also access to policymakers and universities. So we need to hire people, right? We need to make sure we can have good connections with universities to get the best talent at Prewave, and access to later stage capital, obviously.
I think Lisa touches on one interesting aspect of ecosystem, which is they are geographically different. And most of the time, at least in Europe, we kind of compare them city by city. And some success factors such as availability of capital is quite different, right? If you are based in Vienna, if you are based in London, if you're based in Berlin, it makes a whole lot of difference. And also for the situation of being eligible to receive grants, quite different nation by nation, right? So to me, an important factor is also how is an ecosystem different in different locations in Europe, and is the startup actually exposed to tap into certain, let's say, fields which are really crucial for the company's development, right? And that may be access to capital or to government grants, but that may be as well access to great talent from universities or other startups, right? Mm-hmm.
I was just going to say, I'm going to steal the innovation one, because it's also the diversity of thought that comes across in how each one of us is even interpreting the word ecosystem, and I'm definitely stealing that one for the next.
And the interaction
and the interaction across it, yeah.
I think one interesting aspect of it is also that in some way we all share the same incentives. That's the idea that we are aligned on that. And now if you look back on the last 12 months, the macroeconomic environment definitely drastically changed, and it's much more difficult, for sure, for the startups, but I think for the whole ecosystem, you have that situation. How do you think the ecosystem needs to adapt to this new environment?
Okay, I go. I think that's the good thing is that it's an ecosystem, so you are not alone. So, of course, that is also a cycle. It's not the first time that happens, and we are all suffering. So how it has to adapt? We have seen that startups that are more capital efficient, that investors maybe more slower in investing, but at the end they're investing. But at the end, we are not alone, and we are talking and finding the solutions together, knowing what are the strengths and the threats that we have. But the important thing is we are doing it together. And that's the richness of being an ecosystem.
I think if it comes to that question, I think one has to first understand how the ecosystem changed over time, right? And I feel the heaviest impact is probably the availability of capital across different stages and the availability of talent as well. And I think when it comes to the latter, it's actually a kind of a positive development happening, right? By, larger startups or organizations in general laying off people also made it made great talent available to earlier stage startups as well. So there are a couple of factors that are changing, but not necessarily in a negative way, right? And I think in total or netted, I think it's actually a situation, especially for early stage startups, where it's still where a very positive environment exists in order to emerge eventually.
I think I agree. I'm a self-proclaimed recession Greek, so I have actually read recessions and sort of done a lot of work in stress testing for a previous part of my career. And one of the things that I find quite fascinating during a crisis of what we have seeing right now, it cuts out all the noise. It cuts out sort of the things that is the chaff, and you get down to the basics. People have to really sort of stress on that. And the more connected you are, the more chances of success, right? Like depending on others, and going back to what you were saying about how people come together. And the more on a more positive note, I always feel like what we tend to forget is some of the biggest companies have come out at the back of recessions, and they have really built and put their head down and focused and came out of at the back of recessions. And so that's something that's quite important to remember. So, build great products, work with people around you, make sure that you're really getting through it. And that's what you can learn from looking at, how large companies have survived over the years. And that's a future to look forward to.
Maybe Lisa, since you're the founder here in this circle, I currently get a lot of messages from startups who are really in dire need of funding. And I also feel a certain frustration about the lack of funding available and about investors not funding them at the moment. From your perspective, are we really all together in it at the moment, or is there also frustration from your perspective? You're a very successful startup, so I think you're probably top of the crops. But still, what is your perspective as a founder?
Yeah, so we have been lucky that we have been growing very well in the last 2 years, and we have raised more than 30 million in the last 1.5 years. So luckily we were not that much affected. But when I look at other startups, many of also Austrian startups that were our role models were now here, like, okay, there are layoffs happening, or they need to get profitable and eventually sell. So the big vision of becoming that global platform is not there. That's obviously something that I find not very positive, right? So we were hoping to get a lot of the category leaders out of Austria, and that is hitting just this market thing is coming their way. So that's obviously not good. I think for a founder in this situation, I think it's important to be always ready to move. Yeah, so we have to observe the numbers every month, and so maybe we would otherwise make half-year plans or something like that, but now it's really quarterly or even monthly that we need to adapt. How quickly are we growing? Just to have always a plan A, plan B, plan C in the pocket to be able to steer through this market environment.
I would like to add one thing on what Mitra was saying, because she was saying about, the connections. And I think we have one special thing in this ecosystem. It's that people like to help each other. I mean, you can be an investor and not invest in a startup, and maybe you help them. And the entrepreneurs help each other. And this is something that other ecosystems, if they don't have this. So take benefit of this. Even in hard times, there's always people ready to help you.
Why do you think that is the case? That in the startup scene, there is this natural culture of helping. I once read that in the Valley, there's a social fog that you don't have these typical hierarchies where people are saying, okay, I don't have time for you, because everybody could be the next superstar and the next unicorn. Do you think that is the case also in Europe, or is that a different element of helping each other and sharing the load?
Okay, I have not thought on that, but yeah, maybe that fear, no, the FOMO, the fear. But I think really it's so hard to start a company, and you feel so lonely that you don't want that others go through the same, and sharing your problems or sharing the outcomes or the solutions you found. It's something that also benefits you. I mean, because you really want that others don't go through the same process. And for investors, we look at a lot of projects, and we cannot invest on all of them. That doesn't mean that we don't like them. But you have a thesis and you have to stay to it. So you still want that these entrepreneurs succeed. So sometimes helping them, it's not so much time or effort on your side, so why not do it? I mean, this is about generosity also. And if we really want a good ecosystem, a healthy one, we have to be generous and we have to collaborate.
I think one aspect is that the chances of success are extremely low in the startup ecosystem, right? And I think one aspect of supporting each other, helping out each other, in the US, as you describe it, could be a little bit connected to FOMO, as Helena mentioned. But I think in Europe, it is much more about, reducing risk to eventually enable success, whatever that means. If it is, becoming profitable, if it raising another round of funding, right? So I think the motivation may be quite different. But I certainly see that, the recent quarters have triggered a little bit more sympathy also across investors to support startups that they, didn't end up investing in, just because they understand it will benefit the entire ecosystem if there will be, emerging companies eventually.
Yeah, I think I'll use the word empathy, right? Like it's this whole idea that it's so hard to succeed. Everyone's going through a really tough time, either as an entrepreneur, so to sort of build that company, push the boundaries because that's essentially your job, or as an investor on the other side who is trying to raise funds from their end or is trying to support startups, find the lucky ones. But it's that sense of actually giving back in a certain sense on both sides, which I find quite unique and probably what makes it quite successful, right? Like as humanity, that's how we grow. We echo each other and we try and learn from each other, and then we push the boundaries from there, which I find in this system, you see it a lot more easily.
Yeah, so my personal experience is that people are all around very helpful to founders. I think it's more, as a founder, you need to also ask for help, right? And that's always not so easy, particularly if you're in a situation, maybe these investors say just no to you, but they would actually be willing to help you, but then you need to ask them for help, which feels like a strange thing to do, right? But indeed, people would be very willing often to help. If you need an intro to another fund or to a customer and so on, sometimes it also benefits the investor. For example, if they intro you to a customer, they will also get that feedback from the customer. Maybe for the next round, it's a good collaboration, really. So just the only point I want to make, it's also we have to ask for that help. But I believe there is a lot of help out there.
Mm-hmm. We already touched a bit now this investor-startup relationship. And there's all kinds of stories out there from startups who are incredibly disappointed because the investors told them they would have all kinds of other value beyond the money. And then there's the opposite, where startups are just so thankful for the investor because they went to war together and it felt like an incredible support. How do you think, or how do you find this alignment? How can you find an investor, or from the other perspective, a startup, where you really have that connection, where you have that support going on? And what can be the support beyond the money, where it's not bullshit?
Okay, I'll go for it. I think first that for startups, they have to investigate investors. Mm-hmm. And they have to know who they are putting in their home, because it's a journey of 8-9 years. It's a long journey that they will be together. So as a startup, they can choose who to put. Someone that it's just a financial investor. I use it to compare investors with animals. No, you have the turtle, where you know, it's that investor that puts the money, hides, and you don't see them until they come back for, you know, receiving the money. But you also have the bee that seems a good investor, but the day you have to negotiate something, it's like pushing you and biting you. Or the fly that it's, oh, can you help me? Or I have this customer, but they don't add value. But then you have, you know, like the dolphin, which is the smartest animal that really brings money, or the zebra that, you know, has good relations with other species, and these species are the customers. So the investor that brings you customers, or the dog. That one that is there, you know, the best friend for human beings. So is there one like, you are worth it, go for it, I believe on you. So at the end is about startups, they have to choose who they put on there. So they have to know who is the investor. And for the investors, we already know who we want to. We know which kind of investor we are, which kind of animal. And, you know, we decide on which relationship. In our case, we don't want to be a turtle. We want to be there. We want to be, you know, the dolphin, the zebra, the dog. We want to be there for the entrepreneurs because we are, you know, their friends, their partners on their journey. And we look for entrepreneurs that appreciate that value, and that we really are there for help, because we don't want to know bad news with the report. We want to know the bad news 3 months before they happen, so we can really help them to avoid it, or to do whatever it's in our hands. Or, you know, I was really, really happy one day, one Friday, 7 p.m., you know, I was going on holidays, and, you know, one entrepreneur rings and said, I have a problem, I didn't know who to talk to. Okay, I really got what I wanted, this trust relationship between the entrepreneur and myself. So it's about both parties looking at this kind of relationship.
Yeah, I would like to double down on the last aspect, which is establish that relationship of trust early on. When we work together with early stage teams, you know, we are not interested in our regular catch-up calls to just understand what is going particularly well. Actually, that is less interesting to us than understanding where the challenges are, right? And I think it is needed from founders as well to reflect on that and to actively tell the investors, we are struggling with that. How can you help us overcoming these issues, right? And for us, we heavily rely on this input, because, you know, at Cavalry we have a network of 300 private individuals behind us invested in our fund, so they have a natural incentive to support the portfolio companies from the firm. But it's really, really difficult to trigger action if we don't know what the issues are, right? If someone tells me from a founder's perspective, look, I need to reach out to someone who understands performance marketing particularly well, who is well connected in the automotive industry or whatever it is, right? Then I can start acting and I can start to deliver support, right, in one way or the other. But it needs that, this candid conversation where you would not only talk about, you know, what's going well, but what is more so focusing on challenges that you have as a founder.
Yeah, I think I completely agree with that. We tend to think of it as the 4 C's that we deliver to all of our partners or people we are investing in: capital, content, connectivity, and community. Those are sort of our dimensions in which we can offer the startups that we are working with. The capital, particularly in the area that we are working with, is actually quite an important one. So if you're working with underrepresented founders, we tend to see a lot of mentoring, but not enough capital on the table. And so actually making sure that that capital is down on the table and that you have your skin in the game is quite important for us, particularly if you're dealing with the population that we are working with. The content is everything from how do you build your business, right? Like, you know, just make sure you have all the tools available. We can point you into the right directions as you're thinking about different stages, different growth paths, and all of those components. The connectivity is, I think, the part that's probably the most valuable sections, in the sense that, like you had 300 people at the back, but it's, as Morgan Stanley, again, we have a large network of our own employees, but then networks of our clients and others who are working with us through it. So really connecting these companies who may not be available and having that space is a big part of what we can offer the companies. And I'm a big believer, in the last part on the community side, I'm a big believer you learn with other people in pain together. So that community of having other portfolio founders and actually working with them through the problems that you might be facing is a really important part of how we think about it. Having said all of that, and while those structures are true, being very clear on exactly what you can offer and what other people can actually ask from you probably makes the best decisions. And sometimes we see great companies, we may not be the right investor for them. And actually knowing that as an investor, and vice versa for the companies as well. Like, we may bring a lot to the table, but we may not be the right investor for them. And being open and honest about knowing that is actually really important for us.
Yeah, I think, so we're talking about how to maximize the upside, how to find the best investor, but I think it's also important to avoid making mistakes when structuring your cap table early on, because that can literally kill your company, right? So I think whenever you have to get the first investors on board, I think it's important to talk to somebody who knows how to structure a cap table, particularly if you're a VC-funded business. So let's say things like giving a business angel or somebody who's not working in a startup scene like 10 or 20% of the company is going to be a big mistake, right? And that's maybe something, when this is like the first 50,000 euros you've ever seen, that it might look like a good idea, right? So just, I think there are certain mistakes that you can make while choosing an investor, and this is mainly about the structure and about strategic alignment of that person or institution that comes on board. And I think you need to be very clear of what is the motivation, what is the long-term goal. Is this a typical VC business model? And also be aware of that means an exit at some point, right? You should also ask how long is that fund duration? What is the long-term strategic interest of that player? Because once they're on the cap table, this will be there for a long time, right? It's like a marriage. So you need to really look at the long-term factors. That's just something I would mention here. And then if it comes to the upside, okay, when you have several options, what could you optimize for? I think one thing that's early on important is the reputation of the fund, because it opens your doors in the next round. There are simply some funds in the next round that will choose to look at your pitch deck because they see another name on the cap table. So it's not the only factor, but it's something that matters. And I think the second thing is really the person you will be working with, particularly in the early stages. It will be mostly the interaction with the fund will be through that person. So it's really also about your personal fit with that investment manager or partner. It's also good to look at the other partners and investment managers because there might be a change. We experienced that also several times. So really understanding what is the DNA of that company culture at the fund, how are they thinking, how supportive are they in tough times, that has been said, because the last thing you want in tough times is an investor that is putting additional pressure, right? You want somebody who is supporting you through tough times, and that's something you will just understand by interaction and also observing that investment process. Like how do they interact? Is it like whatever they say on day one, is that also the same thing that is on day 3 and day 30? Is that the same thing continuously? These are the things that matter to us.
We shortly touched already now the topic of underrepresented founders, and I was wondering if we're talking about how can investors shape the ecosystem, do you think there's any type of value proposition specific to underrepresented founders that investors could develop, where you would think that maybe the broader founder landscape doesn't value that as much, or there might be blind spots? What do you think can an investor do to actually really help underrepresented founders to be more successful and more active also in the ecosystem?
I can kick off and I can go on forever on it. I won't. I think first things first, like we need to remember the statistics, right? Like it's still less than 2% of funding going to underrepresented founders, female founders, founders from an ethnic minority, etc. Right? Like that's the thing. You don't change that without putting money on the table. So first, make sure you invest. And you invest because diversity is actually a really important aspect from just business and returns perspective, and this is what we truly believe in. So if we did this piece of research in 2018, and if we had invested at least the same rate as the demographics, we had $4.4 trillion, and this is just in the US market. $4.4 trillion, so it's essentially an under-tapped market that you're just not investing in. And so just basics, you should get better valuations, you should be able to drive returns if you just think about it as a market. And then if you think about it from like a resilience perspective, there's research, whether it's public markets, whether it's sort of debt markets, whether it's sort of startups, all the analysis essentially shows that there's a lot more resilience in diverse founders because there's just too little going in, and actually they have so many different life experiences that it makes them more resilient, and you should see that in the performance of these companies over the long run. So you invest because you get better returns, you get more resilient returns in different times. So that's the business case of why you want to be investing in underrepresented groups and founders. But most importantly, it goes back to what we were talking right at the start for me, which is it's about innovation. And innovation never really truly happens in like the center, right? Like it happens when, it happens at the peripheries. That's where people are, pushing the boundaries. You're getting new people into the fold. And diverse founders have this big benefit that they're actually launching into areas that are not today tapped for various reasons. They have a natural affinity for them. So invest because of all of these different aspects, but actually going back to it, put money on the table, and that's the best thing you can do.
I would like to build on that because there are studies that prove really, investing in diversity, it's about money, it's about the returns, and it's not just about the rights or the good thing to do, which is it already also, but it's about profitability. There are studies, I think it's about a BCG and First Round Capital, that they say that diverse teams give a 63% more return on investment than only male or only female also. So it's about diversity. So why? Because you have diversity of thinking, and innovation cannot happen when everyone thinks the same. So this is the first thing. And the second thing is, if we really want the change, we want to force the change until it's normal, it's natural, but it's not now. It's still, women founders are underfunded, so we have to force it. In our case, I mentioned, we are really trying to invest in diversity, especially in the south of Europe, and putting money over the table. And it's not only about putting the money, but then making sure that they have the right connections to get more money on the following rounds. Because I think that we are, as a society, we are covering really the pre-seed stage funding for female startups, but we want female startups to get Series B, Series C, and get really successful. And we have to increase the percentage over that pyramid. That will be the second. And of course, I think there is one thing. It's about trying to give them, role models, give them that they have a good reputation, that they are, they are famous, so they are shown, so others get inspired, and giving them the confidence, saying, really, we believe in you, you can, because sometimes we tend, to have the imposter syndrome, which at the end, there are super talented, impressive people, but they don't believe they can.
I think one aspect that Helena touched on, VC is oftentimes considered as a catalyst of innovation, right? But it can also be a catalyst of diversity in a way, and forcing these lighthouse examples, kind of having this inspiration there of female founder that is IPOing a company or so, right? And all of that is still at its infancy, I feel, where you need to just create an ecosystem that puts more awareness into this. Like I've been studying industrial engineering at 2 technical universities in Germany. And just looking around at the fellow students, like I hardly see any women, not even talking about any other underrepresented groups, right? So it's an issue that is not only there when it comes to, founding companies, but it starts already earlier. And you need to have this inspiration, as a young woman, as a young, kind of person in an underrepresented group, to go after it eventually, right? And be triggered, so to say. And our job is really to force that lighthouse example, basically.
Okay, so I think there's 2 things, one regarding founders, one regarding investors. So maybe what is my own strategy to deal with this? So for myself, I've decided that I will not expose myself too much to these statistics, or I will also not expose myself too much to this whole conversation, because it's just would not give you the right mindset to raise a successful round, right? So just the reality, you need to, for a round, maybe pitch to 50 investors, you will get 48 no's, maybe if you're lucky, 2 term sheets, maybe 1, and you need to fight for many weeks. You need to convince every single investor that you will build this next billion-dollar company, the global category leader. How can you go into these talks with this, I'm an underrepresented minority founder, right? It's just something, I know it's the reality, but whatever, but just give the advice, ignore it, and don't expose yourself too much to this conversation. If you're in the shoes of the founder, obviously policymakers, investors, and so on, let's try to change the ecosystem. But as the founder, you need to just think that you have a competitive advantage and not a competitive disadvantage in order to be successful in fundraising. So this is just, my take on that. I think you should be busy with making your product better, understanding your market better, pricing, all of that things. And maybe later on, once we have built successful startups, we can go back and change the ecosystem in another way. But the second thing towards investors, money was an issue already. I think it's also good to look at the personal financial situation of the founders. Talking about things like childcare. I have also 2 little kids, and let's say to combine being a CEO and a co-founder of a big company and having kids will mean you need childcare. And having enough financial security in terms of a salary, maybe in terms of a childcare secondary in a round, which can be really as small as 20 or 50,000 euros, will make a lot of difference to a female founder. Will change the conversation at home when it's about who can take care of the children. Will also give you the financial possibilities to get the childcare you actually want in order to be good at your job. I think that's my contribution to that.
Thanks for the honest words. I think it needs courage to be so open here, and I think it also shows the challenge we as an ecosystem have, that we have to show the limitations and where things need to change, but at the same time we need to create an ecosystem where people believe in themselves and not constantly have in mind, okay, my chances are limited and I have these disadvantages and these disadvantages. So I think it's important to be honest here and be straight, okay, as a founder, maybe it's best to try to not constantly focus on it.
Just saying, I'm a data scientist by training, I studied computer science, so for me it's hard to say, ignore the statistics, right? But in this particular role, at this particular time of my life, I think that's the better strategy to just give you the right mindset you need in order to convince the whole world that your company is going to win.
Yeah. All right, we are running out of time. And there's one last thing I would like to do, because, Helena, it was your wish. As we are an ecosystem, we also want to show that we are a community. We'll do a stage selfie. So let's come up with you in the background. We'll show that we are all in this together.
I do quite like the thing at the back, though.
Say hi or something.
Yes, show us some enthusiasm. Perfect. All right, please give a big hand to our wonderful speakers. Thank you.
Thank you.